So I'm Jakob, and my talk is going to be about how your HTTP API is not RESTful. And you can find me, if you want to contact me, on one of these links. I'm from Sweden, based in Stockholm, working in the forest here, sometimes in a really formal way, using a bow tie and everything, and sometimes in a really informal way. Like, not shaved and working with pair programming with creatures who are not shaved either. I'm currently working on a startup called FishBrain, where we make an app for anglers who want to figure out how to catch more and bigger fish. And obviously our current status is to API all the things. And that's also why we have this conference, of course, where everyone wants to API all the things. And obviously, there's this buzzword when it comes to APIs, which is the RESTful APIs. And it's not new. It's been there for, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years almost. And most people think of it as an API where you have these semantic operations, like get and put and post and delete in the regular HTTP way on these resource URLs that you have defined and so on. But like I said, that's not really REST. That's not RESTful. That's just an HTTP API. So during this talk, I will try to shine some light on the difference and maybe do a demo if we have time. And if we don't, you can simply come up to me afterwards and I'll show you those things as well. So let's focus on some theory. So we can start with this API, which is Pivotal Tracker, if you know of the service. This is a really good API, by the way. It's really well documented. It's really easy to understand. It makes sense. Super good API. But what I really dislike is that they call it REST API version 5, when this is absolutely not RESTful. And I have been thinking this a long time, that like I'm getting frustrated by all the people who are calling their HTTP-based interfaces a REST API, because this is RPC, remote procedure calling. And I was delighted to find out that I wasn't the first one who said this. Roy Fielding, who wrote the REST paper, said the exact same thing. So I must be in good company somehow, at least. So REST. What is REST, really? You've all heard definitions and so on. But I like this one, which is to say that representational state transfer, or REST, is an abstraction of the World Wide Web. So you can think of the web as an instance of REST. REST is something even more generic, something more abstract, which is also the reason why it's kind of hard to grasp it. And I think, if you contrast this to an RPC, a remote procedure call interface, which would just be something where you try to abstract the idea of calling something locally. You have these functions, they take these parameters, and so on. That's RPC. REST is something different. And to dig into this, I think we have to answer like a deeper question first, which is obviously, what is the internet then? What is the World Wide Web, really? And I think to the average person, or in layman's terms, the internet is something like this. Unicorns and rainbows and young cats and memes and people going nuts, and a place where, I mean, you argue in a way that you would never do in the real world. But this is not the technical definition, obviously. For us, the web is HTML over HTTP. And as you all probably know, that's hypertext markup language over hypertext transfer protocol. And I don't think everyone has actually pondered what hypertext really is. What's the definition of hypertext? And it seems to be quite a central concept here, right? So it's something we should understand. So this is just stolen from Wikipedia. It says that hypertext is text with references, or hyperlinks, to other text, which the reader can immediately access, or where text can be revealed progressively at multiple levels of detail. So this doesn't have anything to do with computers necessarily. I mean, if you look in a book, something academic or so on, there might be lots of references in the text. There's numbers everywhere pointing you to other pieces of this document where you can read more about this particular thing. So you could think of this as being hypertext, but it's not very convenient compared to a browser and using an electronic device. But even then, using a computer doesn't mean that it has to be HTML in a browser that's hypertext. Any context where you have information that you browse and that you go deeper into or follow new links from, that's hypertext. And obviously we need some convention, like a machine can follow these links as long as it understands the format and the relationships that's going on. But once again, it doesn't have to be HTML. So back to REST then. When we talk about REST, we usually do it over HTTP because that's where everything is being communicated currently. And what we mean then is that we want to follow these 4 things for something to be RESTful. We are communicating something using an internet media type, like HTML is definitely one option, but there's also XML, JSON, images, video, all of these media types. That's step 1, to declare and show what we're communicating. The second step is to use the HTTP methods in the semantic way that they're defined, which is this get, post, and everything. So these 2 first steps is what everyone is doing, and then they call it REST. But there are 2 more parts here. And the first one of those is that we need hypertext links to reference state in our application. We define how we can change that state by inserting hyperlinks in our data to related resources or to the resource itself to allow it to update. So that's what these 2 are about. So if we look back on this API I showed before, the pivotal tracker one, I'm not sure if you can see it right here, but here's a response body from one request. And there's data in here in a kind of document way, like JSON data. But there is no reference of any kind to any other data in this API. So this lives in isolation. You have to find the URL for getting this data in documentation, hard code it into your client, retrieve this, get some data, and then you can't do anything else. You have to read the documentation again to know how to fetch more data. That's the opposite of REST. So what we want is to insert hyperlinks here to make this data have an actual explicit relation that a machine can follow right away. And when we insert the hyperlinks, we end up with something called HATOS, which is short for Hypermedia as the engine of application state. And this is where REST is really different from other architectures. So it's like a constraint built into REST. Yeah, I already said this. That distinguishes it from other architectures. And let's go right to the definition then. The idea here is that the client should interact with the application through these hyperlinks only that are supplied in the object. If we wanted to do something else from this project we retrieved in the Pivotal Tracker API, we should have had links for those operations there. And that will cause the client to not need any prior knowledge about how it works. It can just see what operations are available right now that I can do according to who I am and according to the state of the system. And these can change, obviously. The links doesn't have to be the same every time I invoke this or retrieve this data. And the only thing the client really needs is like a generic understanding of hypermedia. How do I traverse this data? How do I follow these links? And how do I find these links within this data? And just to contrast it again with more RPC-like systems like SOA or like SOAP and so on, clients and servers interact through an interface that you have defined beforehand, either through documentation or through some formal specification. If you have that, it's not RESTful. Of course, you're allowed to write documentation anyway, but I mean, it shouldn't be a requirement. It shouldn't be necessary to understand how to use your application. And the easiest way to get started with this in the context of of Pivotal Tracker here would be to just add one link to this sub-object here. So you could write a client that knows that if there's a property called link inside of these structures, that's a new URL that I can follow and get some new data and then find new links there and continue browsing. So that's like the starting point. And you can think of it as while you're browsing the web, which I suppose looks something like this. When regular people have no idea of how the web works, go to Facebook and check on their grandchildren. They just go to facebook.com. They don't know what a URL is. They just go to Facebook. And from there, they scroll and they see some events and they can click like a photo and someone is tagged in that photo and they can click on a person to get their profile and they kind of explore what's in there. They don't know about URLs. They are not querying for something in particular when they start. They just start from the same square one as always. So that's kind of the rule of thumb to create something that's RESTful, is that when your API starts to feel like you're browsing the web itself, then you're starting to become RESTful. And there are 3 rules of thumb for achieving that, I would say. And the first one is to avoid fixation. You should not use fixed resource names or fixed hierarchies. Of course you can, but it's not a requirement. You shouldn't have to do that. The server should own the namespace. The server knows what the URLs are for finding different types of data, but the client should not have to know that. It should just follow links. And then the server instructs the client on how to interact with the data, like how to find new things using, for example, links in HTML and forms to post or put or delete to kind of change state. And if there is no form, then that means I can't change this resource. I can't create new stuff. I can just view it. And if there is no link to data, it means that you don't have access to that data or the data is not available or whatever. All the operations you should be able to perform should be provided by the server as an instruction during runtime and not something you read in a documentation. And the second one is to not have types in the sense that they are like significant for the client. You can have types internally, but you don't expose types to the client. And in this way, REST is truly duck-typed and not something that is declared beforehand. It should be able to change. And the only things you need that are type-like is the media types, which defines what's the format of this data that I'm sending, so the client can actually understand what it gets back. Like the ones I mentioned before. Maybe it's sending HTML, maybe it's sending JSON, maybe it's other types of media, like images and so on. And also some standardization of relation names. What are the names of links? How do I find links? And how do I understand this? I mean, a browser, when you use it, doesn't know if you're doing bank transactions, if you're on a social network commenting someone's fish, or if you're in a wiki creating data. It just understands that there are links, there are ways to send data to a server, and so on. And that's the way a REST client should be able to act on a REST API. And of course, in practice, you will have an intent when you're using the API. You will know what you're actually doing, hopefully. But you shouldn't have to. You should just be able to follow these links and do whatever you can and explore it. And the third bullet here is, well, put in a different way than the other ones, that there should be no prior knowledge. Once again, obviously you have some knowledge of the API you're gonna be using, otherwise it's kind of nuts to use it. But you shouldn't need it. There should be one entry point, like when your grandmother goes to Facebook. She goes to facebook.com, probably through a bookmark because she doesn't like typing. And everything is state-driven by client selections. The client acts on the data that it gets back, and that changes state of the system. And the server provides the options. So when you're following this this idea of hypertext as the engine of application states. It decouples the client and the server in a stronger way than when you have these strictly defined RPC interfaces. And it allows the server to evolve independently. It can add new fields to data it passes back. It can change how you get access to stuff, what you can access. I mean, for example, if I decide that users who are team leads in an organization should not be able to add members to their team anymore, you simply remove that link from the data you're passing to the client. And since there's no link to create or no form to create data, it can no longer do it, and therefore it knows that it's not possible to do it anymore. It doesn't have to communicate it to the client in another way beforehand. So you write a reactive client where you kind of check the data before you allow it to do actions. And also like what state transitions are valid and so on. So all mistakes related to what you can do and when you can do it and so on, they kind of go away. And then, I mean, what should this look like in JSON? Because in HTML, it's well defined. What's a link? What's a form? But when it comes to JSON or XML or something, we have to define that ourselves. And what I like to do is to have like a native format that I start with when I write an API, which is typically JSON. And then you can add templates for various other media types that the client wants to retrieve. Like if they want XML, we just transform the JSON to XML. And if they want HTML, we transform that data to HTML. And if you have the option to retrieve it as HTML, then you can actually browse your API in the browser. So I'm running really short on time, so let's keep this demo quick, but just a super simple example here. Let's see. Like that, maybe. So here we have some API for a sales system, and I can go to the teams list to see that, oh, there's two teams here, a B team and an A team. And if I go to the A team, there are some links here for doing stuff like showing sales reps in the A team. And here's a few people. And if I instead decide to get this as JSON, there's obviously the data here. It's an array of 3 different salespeople. But there's also a bunch of links to this salesperson, to the target the salesperson has, the stats for the past time, and so on. So I can like open myself, go to like the weekly stats. Oh, here are my sales stats. I can go to some week. I can go to the next one, and so on. And all of this, nothing has been specifically coded for HTML. This is just a template turning it into HTML from the JSON that I originally have here. And a client that would be acting on this data would be acting on those links. And of course, I could spend just as long a talk about how to implement this and how to do it in a way that makes sense, but we don't have time for that, so come up to me afterwards instead. And for now, let's finish with saying that I think that the mistake most people make when it comes to making something simple, like an API, we want them to be simple, is that we think that it should be simple to design these things. This is not simple because it's putting more work on you as the API developer. You will have to create these links. You will have to think of what is valid when and who can do what, and have I actually inserted all the relations that make sense from this point in the API to all other points. There's a lot of work to be done. But when it's done, it becomes really easy to consume this. So yeah, the effort required to design something is inversely proportional to the simplicity that we want to achieve. And obviously, this is not there in the most common frameworks. I worked in quite a few of these, and I still haven't seen it. If you have, let me know how to really help you do these things, because they only help you do these very RPC-like things. And I hope to see something else in the future where we can get some aid in this also. And if none of you build it, I probably will try to do it myself at some point. But yeah, that's it from me, and thank you so much.